Hello friends, welcome back. Today we are going to look at the penultimate chapter on the uses of a comma. So we have already completed comma rule 1, where we have defined that a comma is to be used between an independent clause and a dependent clause, or a dependent clause and an independent clause, never between an independent clause and an independent clause, which leads to a comma splice error. This is the comma rule 1. Right, today we are going to look at the comma rule 2. So let's start with comma rule 2. Comma rule 2 is very simple. Comma rule 2 says that commas should be used to separate non-essential clauses or non-essential elements on both sides of a sentence. So let's take this example, the Bay of Fundy, a body of water between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, experiences the world's highest tidal range. So as we can understand, we have already done this example before, that this portion, a body of water between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, this is the non-essential element on the non-restrictive clause, and hence it has got to be demarcated by a comma on both sides. So restrictive versus non-restrictive. How do we differentiate between what is restrictive and what is non-restrictive? So let's understand that with an example. The aurora borealis, more commonly referred to as the northern lights, is much better known than its southern equivalent, which is the aurora australis. Of course, northern lights as commonly seen in places like Norway, Finland, right? We have known that beautiful display of lights, celestial display of lights. The aurora borealis, which is nothing but more commonly referred to as the northern lights rather, right? This refers back to aurora borealis. So hence, this is a non-restrictive clause. The sentence could simply read, the aurora borealis, which is much better known as the northern lights, can be, or more commonly known as the normal lights, right, can be deleted, and is much better known than its southern equivalent, the aurora australis. So the sentence could simply read as, the aurora borealis is much better known than its southern equivalent, the aurora australis. This could simply be deleted. So hence, this is definitely a non-restrictive clause. But then now let's take an example. We have changed this sentence into a little more different example. The celestial light show that you witnessed is called the aurora borealis, more commonly referred to as the northern lights, is much better known than its southern equivalent, the aurora australis. Now out here, what we have done is that is called the aurora borealis, more commonly referred to as the northern lights. Now we have used a dash to start with and a comma to end this. This basically is incorrect because it has got to start with a comma and it has got to end with a comma, because again this is a non-restrictive clause, because it's the same thing, the aurora borealis, more commonly known as the northern lights, same thing. So again a non-restrictive clause. This is incorrect because we have started with a dash on one side and it ends with a comma. It's got to either start with a comma and end with a comma. Alternatively, it can also start with a dash and end with a dash. We will take this up when we do our dashes, but then alternatively, it can start with a dash and end with a dash. Okay? More often than not, when you have a non-restrictive clause which has already got commas within the sentence, you start with a dash and end with a dash, just to demarcate the non-restrictive clause from the naturally or organically appearing commas in the sentence. So now let's come to the basic question of what is a restrictive clause and what is a non-restrictive clause. So let's take this example. The cafe that Chester recommended is a fantastic restaurant. The sentence could simply read as, the cafe is a fantastic restaurant, you might argue. But it is not that case, because the cafe is a fantastic restaurant doesn't refer back to which cafe am I talking about. This which goes missing. Once this which goes missing, this no longer is a non-restrictive clause. That just a recommended is actually a recommendation, and hence this is a restrictive clause in this sentence. So this is not to be treated as a non-restrictive clause. So we have to understand the difference between a restrictive and a non-restrictive clause. So the cafe is a fantastic restaurant doesn't make any sense, because it could be any arbitrary cafe that both you and me wouldn't understand. So we are talking about a particular cafe which was recommended by Chester, and hence that is why it is very important for us to mention that Chester recommended. So this is not a non-essential clause or non-restrictive clause. Hence, this cannot be demarcated by two commas. So the sentence should simply read, the cafe that Chester recommended is a fantastic restaurant. It is an essential element. So let's do some examples. The sandhill crane, a large bird native to North America, has the longest fossil history of any extinct bird at 10 million years. So as you can understand, large bird native to North America can be removed out here. The sandhill crane has the longest fossil history of any extinct bird at 10 million years. That is basically the sentence that we are looking at. So this is a non-restrictive clause, a large bird native to North America, and hence this can be removed. So the sentence should simply read as, the sandhill crane has the longest fossil history of any extinct bird at 10 million years, hence this has got to be demarcated by two commas on both sides. So the correct answer to this one should be a D, when we have a comma to start with and a comma to end. Saint Lucia, a sovereign island in the Caribbean, is the only country in the world named after a historical woman. So again, we can see that a sovereign island in the Caribbean, we have to start with a comma, end with a comma. I cannot start with a dash and end with a dash, or we can start with a dash and end with a dash. So the correct answer to this one, of course this one is an appositive, this is a phrase. The correct answer to this one is a B, wherein because we have started with a dash, right, we have to end with a dash. In place of commas, the non-restrictive clause can be bound by dashes on both sides. Typically, they are bounded on dashes by both sides when we have got internal commas, just to make it clear in the sentence that when the non-restrictive clause starts and when the non-restrictive clause ends. If it has got internal commas, typically to make it clear that this whole portion is the non-restrictive clause, we would use a dash instead of a comma. So now look at this example. But Jason Box, an associate professor of geology at the Ohio State, believes that another factor added to the early thaw the dark snow problem. Great. So basically this could be removed. I'm quite sure about that. Jason Box believes. Definitely non-restrictive clause starts with a comma and should end with a comma, and hence the answer should be a B. Now we move to comma rule number 3. Comma should only link independent clauses with coordinating conjunctions to another independent clause. So the idea is very simple. We have already talked about this before. If we have got two independent clauses and if we put a coordinating conjunctions like your fanboy conjunctions in the middle, the second part becomes the dependent part. So it becomes an I comma D relationship. So anywhere we find this fanboy conjunctions or coordinating conjunctions, they should be preceded by a comma. So it should be I comma the coordinating conjunction and another I. This part becomes the dependent clause. Okay. Now there are certain sentences in English which would call run-on, or which are improperly written or improperly punctuated. So let us take the example of one such run-on. Let's look at this. Because humans burn fossils, thus increasing levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which results in the emission depleting the ozone layer. Therefore, the greenhouse effect is intensified, leading to global warming and climate change. Wow, what a sentence. But if you look at the sentence closely, you will find that it starts with a because, and hence this definitely gives rise to a dependent clause. And the second part also starts with a therefore after the comma, and hence the two dependent clauses. There is no independent clause in the sentence at all. So this kind of a sentence is absolutely incorrect. You cannot have a sentence without an independent clause. There's a very interesting portion of the SAT or of English which SAT tests, which is comma before the and. Now, when you have the and, it could be used in two ways. One, a conjunction, obviously, and is a fanboy conjunction, and it generally is used as the last. It generally is used as the last word when we have a list. When we have a list. So if you have A, comma, B, comma, C, and if we have D, you always have this and. Here in this case, it is not used as a conjunction. But obviously, if you have got sentence 1, which is an independent clause, sentence 2, which is an independent clause, if you want to add that, you can also use and. So and has got two uses. Same with actually or, same with but. They have got two uses, both of them, but these are not tested on the SAT. So we are not going to speak about these ones, but and definitely is tested on the SAT, that it has got two uses. One, it always appears at the last fag end of the list, and it is always used as a conjunction also when it comes to the conjunction of addition. So there is a curious case of the and. The case of the and is very simple, that if you have got a list, which has got multiple entries, right, and if you are using commas in that, the rule is very simple. If you have got a list, the rule is very simple, that if you have got a list with two items, we don't use a comma, before and. Right? Rule is very simple. If you have got two items in a list, then we don't use a comma before the and. But if you have got more than two items, if you have got more than two items in the list, then you always have a comma before the last and. So if it is A and B, then this is perfect. But if you have got A, comma, B and C, you always have a comma before the last and. That is what is the rule. This is called the serial comma or the Oxford comma. So the SAT rule is very simple. If you have got two items in a list, then you don't use a comma before the and. If you have got more than two items in the list, you always use a comma before the last and. And why is it so? Then we will find that out. So you can read through, pause the video, you can read through how the serial comma and things like that came into existence and all those things. But then the rule is this, as simple as that, right? We will try and understand that with some examples as to if you don't use the last comma, why is the sentence sometimes not clear. So let us look at some of these sentences. I had dinner with my parents, Barack Obama and Beyonce. So what did I mean? Did I mean that my parents are, so this Barack Obama is my father, right, and Beyonce is my mother? Did I mean that? I definitely didn't mean that, right? I definitely didn't mean that. I wanted to say that there were four entities actually, my parents, that is my mother and my father, and there was Barack Obama and there was Beyonce. So if we don't put a comma this way, this could be actually read as a pair, which would actually ambiguously mean that I had dinner with my parents, father being Barack Obama and mother being Beyonce, which is not what the meaning of this sentence originally was or intended for. So that is why whenever you have got 1, 2 and 3, more than two items, it is imperative on the SAT to put a comma before the last and. I dedicate this award to my parents, Jane Austen and Albert Einstein. Same thing. I love my friends, Lady Gaga and Justin Timberlake. So I love my friends, item number 1, item number 2, and item number 3. Not really that Lady Gaga and Justin Timberlake are my friends. So there are ambiguities of this sort which would happen with or also, but not tested on this SAT. So I will leave it to your discretion. And the same thing would happen with an or out here, food for thought, right? You can choose or German, right? Same thing. But then this is not tested on the SAT, so I would not delve into the details of this one. Comma before the but. 99.9% of the times this is not going to be tested on the SAT, but then but has got a comma only when it is used as a conjunction. Sometimes but is not used as a conjunction, like this one, my teacher is tough but fair. In this one we don't use a comma. Life is but a dream. We don't use a comma like this. So this is the correct one, this is the correct one, but such sentences are almost impossible to find on the SAT, so we will not contemplate too much. So stay tuned for the last comma rules between 4 to 9, which is 2.13, yet to follow.